Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the Hidden Darkness of Elmore, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. At first glance, Elmore looks like the kind of place where nothing can go wrong. The sun is always shining, the streets feel alive with colorful characters, and every corner of the town seems like it belongs in a child's daydream. But when you linger a little longer, when you pay attention to the tiny cracks in its painted surface, you start to realize that Elmore doesn't quite hold together the way it should. It's as though the very fabric of the town is stitched loosely, threads pulling apart if you tug too hard. The world of Gumball has always been strange, but what makes Elmore so unsettling is how inconsistent it is. One moment gravity seems perfectly normal, and the next that it bends to serve a joke or a gag. A character can change their shape, their species, even their logic, without any warning. The people of Elmore are built from clay, paper, pixels, puppetry, or traditional drawings, and yet they all walk side by side as if nothing is unusual. It creates a world that feels playful at first, but under the softness is an unease that never truly goes away. Think about how you dream. In dreams, we accept impossible rules without question. A hallway stretches endlessly. A friend's face becomes unfamiliar. The ground vanishes beneath your feet. Elmore moves with that same dream logic. Rooms grow and shrink. Characters melt into new designs. Entire neighborhoods blink out of existence. For a children's show, this seems like harmless fun. But if you sit with it, really imagine living in that space. The light-hearted illusion begins to crumble. If you were walking down Elmore streets, could you trust that the ground wouldn't bend and ripple like water? Could you believe that the walls around your house wouldn't stretch out like rubber, pulling you into a shape that isn't your own? That's the quiet terror of Elmore. It's not just a town, it's a world with no anchor. The rules are written and erased in the same breath. Characters in Elmore live as if none of this instability bothers them. Gumball laughs. Darwin goes along with it. The citizens move about their days. But every so often, you catch a flicker of awareness. A character glitches, freezes, or looks around as though the walls aren't where they should be. The moment passes and life continues, but the impression lingers. It's as if the residents know on some level that their world could unravel at any moment, and the only way to survive is to laugh through it. Take the mix of art styles that make up Elmore. On the surface, it's charming, a celebration of creativity. But when you pause and look deeper, the collision of these forms feels uncanny. A claymation character brushing shoulders with a flat 2D figure. A photorealistic object sitting comfortably in a cartoon house. Puppets standing next to pixelated beings. None of them belong to the same reality, yet they coexist. That coexistence is where the unease sets in. Because what kind of world would allow such contradictions? And what does it mean about the foundation of Elmore itself? Sometimes the fragile nature of Elmore's fabric is played as a gag. The background will fall apart, or the set will peel away to reveal a void of nothingness. To the audience, it's funny. To the characters, it's a temporary inconvenience. But think about that emptiness for a moment. When the background peels away, what's left isn't another world waiting behind it. It's just blank space, like the edge of a dream when you realize you're about to wake up. That white void suggests that Elmore is held together only by belief. As long as everyone goes along with the joke, the world stands. But if you question it too much, you might find yourself staring into nothingness. Even the laws of physics in Elmore don't hold weight. They bend and break when it serves the moment, as though they're written in pencil instead of stone. Gumball can be flattened like paper and return to shape in the next frame. Objects explode without leaving scars. Pain, injury, even destruction rarely leave consequences. It all snaps back to normal with a shrug. At first, this seems like cartoon fun, but if you were inside that world, how could you ever trust the ground beneath you? How could you know that a door would still be a door tomorrow and not a portal to somewhere else? Elmore is fragile because it's built on contradiction. It presents itself as a safe, light-hearted town, but behind the laughter is instability. Imagine walking through your neighborhood and realizing that the houses on your street are all drawn by different artists, some with thick outlines, others with delicate shading, some cut out from photographs. It would feel like reality itself couldn't decide on what was true. That's the feeling of Elmore, a dream teetering on the edge of unraveling. When you begin to see the town this way, the humor starts to feel like a coping mechanism. The characters laugh because if they didn't, they might have to face the truth that their world isn't reliable. The fragile fabric of Elmore means that anything can happen, but it also means that nothing is secure. A joke can save the day, or it can swallow the day whole. And beneath every laugh track, beneath every clever gag, there's a faint whisper reminding us that Elmore's world isn't just silly. It's fragile, unstable, and maybe even unknowable. Think about how fragile memories can be. You remember something one way, and your friend remembers it another. In Elmore, memory seems to shape reality itself. A character forgotten by the town risks vanishing altogether, not through death, but through erasure. This is not just a gag about someone being ignored. It is the unsettling suggestion that existence in Elmore depends on being noticed, remembered, and accepted by the collective. If no one looks your way, the very fabric of the world begins to push you aside, like dust brushed off a table. This fragility shows up in small details. Sometimes the background will subtly shift between shots, as though the world cannot decide what it should look like. Sometimes characters acknowledge that they are inside a cartoon, breaking the fourth wall to point out the absurdity of their own lives. When they do this, it feels lighthearted, but it also draws attention to how unstable their world really is. If you are aware that your life is being animated, then you must also be aware that your life could be erased with the stroke of a pen. There are also moments where Elmore simply folds in on itself, as though the town has grown tired of keeping up appearances. A hallway becomes impossibly long, a classroom stretches into infinity, or a street loops back onto itself like a maze designed to keep its residents from escaping. These aren't just funny visual tricks. They hint at a deeper truth, that Elmore is more like a stage than a real place, and the stagehands are careless with their scenery. Imagine living in a place where you can never be sure what tomorrow will bring, not because of fate or chance, but because the very logic of your world might rewrite itself. A building might be taller one day and shorter the next. A friend might shift into an entirely different form without anyone questioning it. In such a world, certainty is a luxury you can never afford. You live moment to moment, improvising your way through chaos, laughing to keep from realizing the full weight of how fragile everything is. Even the relationships between characters are influenced by this instability. One day, Gumball and Darwin's adventures feel grounded in heartfelt lessons. The next they spiral into surreal chaos where nothing matters and no moral remains. The tone itself flickers, as though Elmore cannot decide if it wants to be warm or terrifying. That tonal inconsistency is part of the charm, but it also feeds into the unease. Because how can a place be trusted if it cannot even trust itself to stay the same? The fragile fabric of Elmore is not only visual or physical, it is also emotional. Characters sometimes show glimmers of despair, of awareness that things around them do not add up. They shrug it off quickly, turning pain into punchlines. But those brief moments linger. You can hear it in the way Gumball complains about his life, or the way other residents break down under the weight of absurd problems. It is all played for comedy, but underneath it is the echo of something more serious, the suggestion that laughter is the only thread holding the town together. Consider the strange phenomenon of characters who disappear from the story without explanation. A background figure seen in one episode never appears again. Sometimes a family member is mentioned, only to vanish from the show's memory. While this might be easy to dismiss as writing convenience, within the world of Elmore it takes on a darker meaning. It suggests that the fabric of the world selectively edits itself, trimming away those who no longer serve a purpose. To live in Elmore is to risk being forgotten, and to be forgotten is to be erased. And then there is the void, that strange undercurrent humming beneath Elmore's reality. Though we will explore it later, its presence can already be felt here. Every glitch, every erasure, every sudden disappearance feels like a shadow of the void stretching into daily life. The fragility of Elmore's surface suggests that the void is always waiting, always ready to consume what no longer fits neatly into the fragile quilt of the town. The beauty of Gumball is that it never shies away from this fragility. Instead, it embraces it, weaving humor out of instability. But for those of us who linger a little longer, who watch closely as the seams stretch and the rules bend, the comedy becomes something more. It becomes a mirror reflecting our own fragile existence. After all, our lives are not as stable as we like to believe. We too are shaped by memory, by chance, by forces outside of our control. And just like the people of Elmore, we laugh, we play, we tell stories because it's easier than facing how delicate everything truly is. Elmore's fragile fabric is both playful and terrifying. It reminds us that nothing is guaranteed, that the rules we trust can dissolve without warning. Beneath the pastel colors and slapstick gags lies a haunting truth. Elmore is not a world of safety. It is a dream balanced on a thread, and any wrong move might tear it open. When we think of a fragile fabric, we usually picture something delicate but still carefully woven. Elmore is different. Its threads are tangled, mismatched, and constantly fraying at the edges. A child might not notice these loose ends swept away by the humor and bright colors, but for those who linger, the instability becomes impossible to ignore. The world is both too much and not enough, bursting with creativity but hollow in its foundation. You can see it in the way Elmore refuses to settle into a single reality. A cardboard cutout can speak and move, while a hyper-realistic object sits casually in a cartoon landscape. The residents never question it. They treat this visual chaos as ordinary life. But for us, watching from the outside, it highlights how fragile their existence truly is. They live in a patchwork quilt where nothing matches, and yet everything is stitched together anyway. This patchwork quality is not random. It feels intentional, almost as if Elmore is aware of its own contradictions and chooses to display them proudly. Yet that pride hides something unsettling. When a world admits that it can be anything, it also admits that it might collapse into nothing. Every wild gag, every absurd twist, every sudden shift in art style is both delightful and terrifying. It delights because it feels limitless. It terrifies because limitlessness often comes hand in hand with emptiness. There are moments in the show where Elmore seems to test the patience of its own characters, as though the world itself is playing a prank on them. Gumball and Darwin will chase after a goal, only for the rules to bend at the worst possible moment. A straight road will twist into a labyrinth. A simple task will spiral into cosmic chaos. These are jokes for us, but for the characters they are lived experiences. And experiences that reveal the fabric of their world is unreliable. The universe itself is not on their side. This raises a question. What does it mean to grow up in such a place? For Gumball and Darwin, instability is normal. They do not fear the ground bending under their feet because it has always bent. They do not flinch when reality changes shape because change is their constant companion. Their laughter is genuine, but it is also survival. If they stop to consider how fragile their town is, they might collapse under the weight of it. By treating absurdity as normal, they protect themselves from despair. But sometimes the mask slips. There are episodes where the characters sense an instability around them. Gumball may look directly at the camera, breaking the fourth wall with a knowing smirk. Darwin may express confusion at a world that refuses to follow rules. These moments are brushed off quickly, but they are haunting because they show awareness. The residents are not entirely blind. They sense the seams of their reality stretching, and though they rarely say it aloud, they must know that something is wrong. The fragile fabric of Elmore also reveals itself in how time works. Events do not always flow in a straight line. A character can die in one episode and return in another without explanation. An entire storyline can be erased, rewritten, or contradicted in later seasons. Continuity is not Elmore's strong suit, and yet that lack of continuity feels intentional. It makes the world slippery, untrustworthy. Even time itself cannot be counted on. Imagine waking up each day not knowing if yesterday truly happened, or if tomorrow will continue the same story. That is the life of Elmore's residents, whether they admit it or not. The physics of Elmore bend with a similar carelessness. A fall from a great height might hurt in one episode and be shrugged off in another. Objects sometimes break the rules of size, weight, or durability, only to return to normal in the next scene. Pain is inconsistent. Consequences are unreliable. Cause and effect, the very backbone of reality, is not dependable in this town. When you realize this, Elmore becomes far less funny and far more unnerving. Because without cause and effect, how can anyone make sense of their lives? Even language itself is fragile here. Characters sometimes slip into wordplay so powerful that it reshapes the world around them. A pun becomes reality. A misunderstanding creates chaos. Words, which in most worlds are tools for describing reality, in Elmore have the power to rewrite reality. That blurs the line between what is true and what is spoken. It suggests that Elmore is not built on physics at all, but on imagination and interpretation. That is beautiful, but it is also deeply fragile. Because if reality is only as strong as a joke, what happens when the laughter fades? One of the most haunting aspects of Elmore's fragile fabric is the silence that creeps in when the jokes stop. Every so often, the show pauses for a quiet moment. A character stares into space. The background hum fades. The scene hangs just a little too long. These pauses are rare, but they are powerful. They remind us that beneath the chaos is an emptiness waiting to be noticed. And once you notice it, you cannot forget it. The laughter masks it, but the silence gives it away. It is in those silences that Elmore feels most like a dream. You are caught in a blur of color and sound, only for everything to freeze, and suddenly you are aware that none of it is stable. Dreams, after all, are fragile. They vanish when you wake. Elmore shares that fragility, clinging to life as long as someone is willing to keep watching, keep laughing, keep believing. Without that belief, perhaps it too would fade, swallowed up by the nothingness at its edges. And so Elmore's fragility is not just a quirk of its design. It is the very essence of the town. To live in Elmore is to live inside a world that knows it is temporary, a place that hides its dread beneath comedy and bright colors. The residents may not say it aloud, but their laughter, their jokes, their endless ability to bounce back after chaos, they're all acts of defiance against the truth. The truth that Elmore is stitched together from scraps, and those stitches could come undone at any moment. Elmore's fragility also shows itself in how it treats its own boundaries. Most towns are defined by maps and borders, but Elmore stretches and folds like a piece of paper being played with by unseen hands. One moment, the characters are walking through the school, and the next, they're in an endless desert, or cosmic void, or even inside the digital world of the internet. These transitions are rarely questioned. They simply happen, as if the world itself is shuffling through locations the way we shuffle through channels on a television. This raises a troubling possibility. Perhaps Elmore is not a town at all, but a stage that shifts its set pieces depending on what story needs to be told. If that is true, then the residents are not really living in a stable place. They are living inside a performance, always at the mercy of whichever forces decide what scene comes next. It would explain the mismatched art styles, the unstable physics, the way reality itself seems written and rewritten. A stage is only convincing until you notice the wires holding it together. Once you notice, the magic fades, and all that is left is the scaffolding beneath. But what if the characters do notice? What if they see the shifting stage, the unstable walls, the inconsistent rules? Some of them certainly seem to. Rob, for example, becomes deeply aware of the cracks in Elmore's reality. His obsession with the void is born from the knowledge that their world is not whole. Yet even before Rob, small glimmers of awareness shine through. Characters point out continuity errors, complain about being redesigned, or even acknowledge that their stories follow the rhythm of television. They know, at least in fragments, that their lives are fragile. And that awareness makes their laughter even more haunting, because it means they are laughing not in ignorance, but in spite of what they know. The fragile nature of Elmore also plays into how justice works, or rather, how it doesn't. Rules and laws are inconsistent. Consequences are fleeting. Sometimes a character is punished severely for a mistake, and other times an even greater wrongdoing is brushed aside as if it never happened. There is no consistent moral framework holding the town together. Instead, reality bends to whatever lesson or punchline the moment demands. To us, this is part of the comedy. To them, it is a reminder that fairness does not exist. They live in a fragile moral order, one where truth and justice are temporary, where the weight of their actions can be erased in an instant. And then there is the matter of disappearance. Elmore is haunted by things that vanish without reason. People, objects, even whole places slip out of existence, sometimes remembered and sometimes forgotten. These vanishings are rarely explained, but they serve as subtle reminders that Elmore's fabric is incomplete. The town is always one step away from unraveling, one tug on a loose thread away from falling apart. Imagine living in a world where you could not trust that your best friend would still exist tomorrow, not because of death or danger, but because the world itself might simply forget them. That is the fragile reality of Elmore. This fragility creates a strange kind of beauty. Because the world is so unstable, every moment carries a weight it might not otherwise have. Every laugh, every friendship, every adventure feels like it could be the last, as though the universe might fold away and erase it at any moment. The characters may not think about it this way, but on some level, their constant energy and joy reflect a quiet desperation. They live fully in each moment because they cannot trust that another moment will follow. For us as viewers, this fragility resonates more deeply than we might first realize. Our own lives are not so different. We like to believe in stability, stable jobs, stable homes, stable relationships. But the truth is that everything is more fragile than we admit. Elmore exaggerates this truth, presenting a world where instability is impossible to ignore. By watching its characters stumble and laugh through their unstable reality, we are reminded that we too live on fragile ground. We just prefer to pretend otherwise. The fragile fabric of Elmore is therefore more than a stylistic choice. It is the core of what makes the Amazing World of Gumball so unique. It is a comedy, yes, but it is also a meditation on instability, on the way worlds can collapse, on the thin threads holding everything together. Every joke, every gag, every surreal twist is both a source of laughter and a reminder that none of this is solid. The buildings, the streets, the people, they exist as long as someone remembers them, as long as someone keeps the story alive. And so when we look at Elmore not just as a cartoon town, but as a fragile dreamscape, it begins to feel less like a children's comedy and more like a reflection of our own deepest fears. The fear that nothing around us is permanent. The fear that everything we know could vanish, erased not with violence, but with silence. The fear that we are living inside a story whose ending we cannot control. Yet there is comfort here too. Elmore is fragile, yes, but it endures. The characters keep laughing, keep moving forward, keep finding joy in the absurdity of it all. Their world may not be stable, but it is still alive, still filled with light, still capable of wonder. Perhaps that is the lesson hidden in the fragile fabric of Elmore. That even in a world of contradictions and chaos, laughter can hold everything together, at least for a little while. In Elmore, laughter's everywhere. Characters crack jokes, situations spiral into slapstick chaos, and the tone almost always pushes you to smile. But within that comedy lies something unexpected. Every so often, the laughter bends in a strange direction. The joke doesn't land where you thought it would. The smile twists. The colors feel too bright. The sounds too sharp. Suddenly, what began as comedy feels closer to horror. It's subtle at first, easy to brush aside. Yet if you lean into it, if you really pay attention, you notice that Elmore has a way of using humor to hide something far darker. One of the clearest signs of this comes in the way faces are animated. Gumball and Darwin, like most of the town, are drawn in a playful style, rounded and friendly. But when the story calls for it, their faces will stretch into grotesque expressions, eyes bulging, teeth gnashing, features melting in ways that feel uncomfortably real. The sudden switch is jarring. One moment you're watching a light-hearted scene, and the next you're staring into an image that looks like it belongs in a horror movie. It lasts only a few seconds, but those seconds linger in your mind long after the laughter fades. Sound plays its part too. Most of the time, Elmore hums with cheerful background music or comical sound effects. Yet in certain episodes, the soundscape changes. The music slows down, drops into unsettling tones, or vanishes altogether. A silence will hang in the air, broken only by a distorted effect or a voice echoing too loudly. The absence of cheerful sound creates a vacuum where unease seeps in. You realize for just a moment that the comedy is a mask, and behind that mask is something cold and strange. Take, for instance, the way Elmore sometimes leans into body horror, even if briefly. Characters will be stretched, squashed, or broken in ways that push past cartoon exaggeration. Their eyes might roll back, their limbs twist, or their skin sag in unnatural ways. In the context of comedy, it earns a quick laugh. But if you pause, if you really look, you'll see imagery that could belong in horror. The difference is only in tone. A funny distortion and a terrifying one are often separated by a single sound cue, a single frame held too long. Elmore walks that line constantly. And then there are the episodes that fully embrace a horror atmosphere without apology. Stories where characters are hunted by strange creatures, or where familiar places take on dreamlike, menacing qualities. An episode might start with a silly problem, missing lunch money, a broken appliance, and then escalate until it feels like a nightmare. The escalation is always sudden, but it never feels out of place. In Elmore, comedy is not a barrier to horror. Comedy is the door through which horror enters. What makes this blend so striking is how it mirrors real life. Fear and laughter are closer than we think. Both come from surprise, from tension, breaking in an unexpected way. Elmore understands this deeply. It uses humor to pull us close, to make us comfortable, then tilts the world just slightly until that comfort cracks. You laugh, then you shiver, then you laugh again, unsure if you should. That uncertainty is where the hidden darkness of Elmore lives. For the characters, these moments of horror are shrugged off as easily as any joke. A monster might chase them through the streets, only to disappear when the punchline arrives. A terrifying transformation might happen in front of their eyes, and they laugh it away. But think about what it would mean to live that way, to see horror melt into comedy, only to rise again the next day. It suggests a world where the line between nightmare and joke does not exist, where terror is always waiting just behind the laughter. Sometimes the horror hides not in creatures or visuals, but in the implications of a story. A family member turns cold and unrecognizable. A friend's identity warps until they're no longer themselves. An ordinary day spirals into something no one can control. These plots are funny on the surface, but underneath they strike at primal fears, the fear of losing those we love, the fear of losing control, the fear of being trapped in a world that doesn't make sense. Elmore invites us to laugh at these fears, but the fears remain all the same. And perhaps the most unsettling part is how normal this blend of comedy and horror feels for the residents. No one screams in terror for long. No one breaks down at the impossibility of what they've seen. Instead, they laugh, shrug, and move on. The horror is not an exception in Elmore. It is part of everyday life. That realization turns the laughter sour. Because if horror is normal, then comedy becomes less about joy and more about survival. There is also something to be said about the way Elmore plays with perspective. Many episodes present the world as the children see it: wild, exaggerated, and illogical. But sometimes the perspective slips. You find yourself looking at the same scene through a darker lens. A hallway stretches longer than it should. A shadow clings too tightly to a wall. A character pauses, stares, and their smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. The shift is small, almost imperceptible, but it tilts the comedy into something unsettling. The magic of this shift is that it never fully abandons humor. The joke is still there, but the delivery feels twisted. Imagine a clown telling a joke in a room where the lights flicker and the silence between laughs lingers too long. The humor remains, but the setting changes how you feel about it. Elmore thrives on this kind of transformation. It takes situations that should be safe, lighthearted, and funny, and gives them an edge sharp enough to unsettle even the most comfortable viewer. One of the strongest examples is how the show treats glitches and breaks in reality. Sometimes characters move in ways that defy their art style. A character's body may suddenly turn hyper-realistic, or a background may glitch into something that looks copied and pasted from an entirely different medium. These breaks are played for laughs, yes, but they also create a deep sense of unease. They remind you that Elmore is fragile. Its world can bend, glitch, or tear open at any time, revealing something unexplainable beneath. The use of different animation styles makes this even more powerful. Elmore is famous for blending 2D, 3D, puppetry, photography, and even live action within the same episode. Most of the time, this is funny and creative. But when the show chooses to push this blending into the realm of horror, the results can be genuinely frightening. A character rendered in a realistic human style might walk into a scene filled with flat, cartoonish figures. The clash feels unnatural, and the longer you look, the more wrong it becomes. The laughter at the absurdity slowly transforms into unease. The town itself becomes part of this strange dance between comedy and horror. Elmore looks bright, colorful, and harmless, but in certain episodes, the environment shifts into something barren or overwhelming. The streets empty out. The sky turns an unnatural color. Familiar houses warp into sharp angles or dissolve into backgrounds that feel unfinished. It's as though the stage curtains slip, revealing that this world is not as stable as it seems. Comedy provides the distraction, but horror lies beneath the paint. Perhaps the most interesting detail is how the show rarely acknowledges this horror directly. The characters don't question why their face is distorted into monstrous forms or why the background turned into something alien. They laugh, run, or fight, but never stop to ask what it means. For them, this blend of tones is normal. But for us, the audience, it raises a strange question. If the people of Elmore are comfortable living in a world where laughter and horror constantly overlap, what does that say about the true nature of their universe? Some fans argue that this unspoken acceptance is what makes the Amazing World of Gumball so memorable. Unlike traditional horror stories that prepare you for fear, Elmore lets the horror slip in unannounced. It doesn't play by genre rules. It allows you to laugh and feel uneasy at the same time, often within the same frame. That duality is rare, and it gives the show its unique power. And when you step back, you realize just how fragile the balance really is. Comedy is the surface, the thin layer of bright paint. Beneath that layer, shadows stretch long, and the possibility of horror is always waiting. That's why the most ordinary moments in Elmore can suddenly transform into something uncanny. A smile stretches too wide, a laugh echoes too long, a friendly place turns silent. These little details are enough to remind us that the comedy we're watching has sharp teeth hidden underneath. Even more striking is how these moments connect with childhood itself. Think about being a child, how you might laugh at something one second and then feel scared of it the next. A toy looks funny in daylight, but at night, its eyes follow you across the room. A joke told by a friend feels hilarious until it takes on a darker edge you don't fully understand. Elmore captures this fragile balance perfectly. It reminds us of how close comedy and horror really are, how easily one becomes the other. That's the brilliance of the show. It doesn't separate joy from fear. It tells us, in its own colorful, chaotic way, that the two are bound together, that to laugh is to acknowledge the possibility of fear, and to fear is to recognize how badly we want to laugh again. This cycle repeats endlessly in Elmore, each episode dipping us into the same rhythm, humor first, unease second, and then back to humor, as though nothing happened. There is another layer to this blending of tones, and it hides in how Elmore uses silence. Most of the time, the show is noisy, filled with exaggerated voices, quick jokes, and lively sound effects. But then, without warning, everything goes quiet. The background noise fades. The laughter cuts out. The room stills, and a pause lingers just a little longer than it should. In that silence, the comedy transforms into something uncomfortable. What felt lighthearted now feels exposed, as if we're waiting for something terrible to arrive. One episode that demonstrates this beautifully is The Puppets. At first, it is playful, filled with silly interactions, but then the show slips into an extended sequence told through puppetry. The colors darken, the humor turns strange, and the playful laughter sounds off-key. Watching it feels like wandering into a dream that is slowly turning into a nightmare. The characters keep talking and joking, but the visuals tell you something is very wrong. That tension between playful words and unsettling imagery is where Elmore thrives. Even the designs of the characters themselves can suddenly lean toward horror. Normally, the art style is soft, round, and cartoony. But when the show wants to, it twists those shapes. Eyes bulge, teeth sharpen, and movements grow jittery. The change happens quickly, often for comedic exaggeration. Yet in those moments, what should be funny becomes disturbing. It's as if the characters briefly reveal a hidden, darker form of themselves before snapping back into something friendly again. A perfect example of this lies in the facial expressions. Elmore has a gift for exaggeration, stretching faces into wild shapes to sell a joke. But exaggeration doesn't always stop at funny. Sometimes the stretched mouth, the wide eyes, and the vibrating pupils create a grotesque image that feels closer to a horror movie than a children's cartoon. The joke is still there, but it is impossible to ignore the underlying fear it stirs. Another fascinating detail is how the show uses background characters. They are often harmless, silent, and part of the scenery. Yet every so often, the camera lingers on them, just long enough for you to notice how strange they are. A face that looks too still, a smile that doesn't fade, a figure standing in the distance, unmoving. You realize that Elmore is populated not just by its main characters, but also by countless silent watchers. And when you notice them, the world feels far less friendly than it did before. Episodes also play with pacing, letting scenes drag just enough to feel uncomfortable. Comedy usually thrives on timing, quick punchlines, fast pacing, and energy. But in Elmore, the timing sometimes slows and the energy drops. The punchline arrives late, and in that delay, attention grows. You expect laughter, but instead you feel unease. That delayed rhythm makes you aware that something is off. It's a reminder that in this world, the usual rules of comedy are not always safe to rely on. Perhaps one of the most haunting tricks the show uses is mixing familiar horror tropes with its silly style. Creepy music cues, flickering lights, and distorted voices appear unexpectedly. A hallway turns into an endless tunnel. A shadow grows larger than it should. a laugh becomes distorted and echoing. These are techniques pulled directly from horror films, and yet they are placed inside a cartoon that is supposed to be light and fun. The contrast makes the fear sharper, because you never expected it to appear in such a colorful setting. Take The Signal, for example. What begins as a normal episode suddenly glitches, characters repeat lines, and the world begins to fall apart as though we're watching a corrupted tape. The comedy remains in the dialogue, but the visuals betray something more sinister. It feels like peeking behind the curtain of Elmore's reality, and what we find is not comforting. It is chaotic, unstable, and just a little terrifying. And the most intriguing part? The characters themselves rarely seem disturbed by these shifts. They panic in the moment, but they quickly return to their normal lives. For them, the balance of comedy and horror is not unusual, it is simply part of existence. For us, though, it's a reminder that Elmore is not bound by the same logic as our world. Its reality is unpredictable, and that unpredictability creates unease. This strange acceptance adds a layer of existential dread. If laughter and horror coexist so naturally in Elmore, maybe there is no real difference between them. Maybe joy and fear are just two sides of the same coin, constantly flipping. That possibility lingers long after the episode ends because it suggests that nothing in Elmore is ever purely safe. A joke may always carry the shadow of something darker behind it. The more you notice it, the more you begin to see how carefully Elmore walks this line. Every laugh hides an echo. Every smile is one twitch away from becoming a grimace. Every bright, colorful scene could darken without warning. The humor draws you in, and then, quietly, the horror makes its presence known. And just like that, the balance shifts again. It is this balance that makes the Amazing World of Gumball feel like a dream you can't quite describe. You laugh, you enjoy yourself, and then suddenly you're unsettled, wondering why a cartoon made your heart race. The unease passes, replaced by another joke, but it doesn't vanish completely. It lingers like a whisper at the edge of your thoughts, reminding you that Elmore is not just a place of joy. It is a place where comedy and horror live hand in hand. What makes this duality even more haunting is the way it mirrors the way we experience fear in real life. Fear rarely announces itself in grand ways. More often, it hides beneath the ordinary. It hides in the pauses between conversations, in the shadow on the wall that looks just a little too tall, in the silence after a laugh when no one speaks. Elmore captures this subtlety. It reminds us that comedy and horror are not opposites at all. They are neighbors living side by side, separated only by the thinnest of walls. Consider the episode The Job. It begins with Richard Watterson being hired at Joyful Burger, which sounds silly and harmless enough. The comedy is fast and physical, with Richard fumbling through his tasks. But then the mood shifts. The colors of the restaurant grow darker, the customers more unsettling, the cheerfulness of the environment becoming suffocating. By the time the story reaches its climax, the fast food chain feels less like a workplace and more like a trap, a place that consumes the workers inside it. The laughter is still there, but it has become nervous, shaky, and uncomfortable. Episodes like this play with our expectations. We come for the laughs, but the show offers us something stranger. It forces us to ask questions we never expected from a comedy. Why does Elmore feel so fragile? Why does humor bend so easily into terror? Why do the characters live with this without questioning it? Those questions linger in the quiet moments, as though the show wants us to laugh first and then lie awake later, puzzling over what we just saw. Even the way Gumball and Darwin react to the horror around them is telling. Their responses are often exaggerated, panicked, and over the top, which feeds into the comedy. But underneath there is a truth to their fear. They are children, after all, and children often live in that thin space where laughter and terror are indistinguishable. They can laugh at a monster one second and then hide under the covers the next. Their innocence magnifies the darkness because they don't have the shield of certainty that adults pretend to carry. And that is perhaps why the show's blend of comedy and horror feels so effective. It speaks to the childlike part of us that still exists, the part that remembers how fragile comfort can be. We laugh because it is safer than screaming. We watch the joke unfold, but part of us wonders when the laughter will curdle into something else. Elmore taps into that primal uncertainty, reminding us that life itself can be both funny and terrifying at the same time. One of the most memorable ways the show embraces this duality is through its endings. Sometimes, after the chaos settles, the episode closes not with a resolution, but with a lingering sense of unease. The joke is delivered, the story is technically complete, but something about the final shot doesn't feel right. A background detail is off. A character's smile lingers too long. The music doesn't resolve the way you expect. It feels almost like the curtain has closed, but the shadows behind it are still moving. That unfinished feeling is its own form of quiet horror. And this, in a strange way, is the hidden beauty of Elmore's storytelling. It doesn't need to scare you directly. It doesn't need monsters leaping from the shadows or villains plotting destruction. All it needs is timing, silence, and a willingness to twist the ordinary into something uncanny. The laughter keeps us comfortable, but in that comfort, the horror becomes sharper. It is a mirror reflecting the fragility of joy itself. When you reflect on it, you realize that this is what makes the Amazing World of Gumball so unique. Other shows separate genres neatly. Comedy belongs in one box, horror in another. But Elmore refuses to choose. It lets the boundaries blur, just as dreams blur when you drift deeper into sleep. One moment you are laughing, the next you are uneasy. And then you laugh again, unsure if you should. That uncertainty is the point. It is the heartbeat of Elmore, pulsing beneath every joke. So when you next think of Gumball's world, remember this. The laughter you hear is not pure. It carries shadows in its echoes. Every joke stretches just a little too far. Every smile has the potential to slip. Every bright scene holds the possibility of turning dark. That is the true genius of Elmore's comedy. It doesn't just make you laugh, it makes you aware of how fragile laughter really is. And in that awareness lies the hidden horror, the quiet truth that comedy and fear are not so different after all. They are both ways of coping with a world that doesn't always make sense, a world where rules bend, where faces distort, where silence lingers too long. Elmore shows us that the two are woven together, inseparable, forever shifting in the same breath. As the quiet of night deepens, think of how the town of Elmore embodies this fragile balance. A place where the absurd makes you laugh, and the very same absurdity can unsettle you moments later. A place where comedy wears the mask of safety, but horror is always waiting just beneath it, ready to peek through the cracks. And perhaps that is why the world of Gumball lingers with us long after the episode ends. Not because it scared us outright, but because it whispered something more unsettling, that joy and dread are never far apart. Every world has rules. Some are spoken, like the laws written into books and enforced by police. Others are unspoken, like the invisible promises of safety that we rely on every day. We trust that the ground beneath us will hold, that the sun will rise tomorrow, that laughter will not suddenly turn into silence. Even in stories and cartoons, there is usually a kind of shield. A character might stumble and fall, but they always get up again. A mistake might lead to embarrassment, but never true harm. These invisible rules give us comfort. They remind us that no matter how chaotic things seem, some order will keep us safe. But in Elmore, those rules don't always apply. The Amazing World of Gumball does something unusual, something almost cruel at times. It builds the illusion of safety, only to pull it away. The result is a world where nothing is guaranteed, where characters can vanish, glitch, or suffer permanent consequences without warning. The laughter we hear feels lighter because of it, but also more fragile. The rules that should protect everyone in Elmore are as unstable as the world itself. Think about the role of accidents in Elmore. In many cartoons, accidents are funny but harmless. A character slips on a banana peel, crashes through a wall, or gets flattened like a pancake, only to pop back into shape seconds later. But in Gumball's world, accidents sometimes carry real weight. A slip can lead to a character being erased. A fall can transport someone into the void, never to return. The very idea of cartoon safety, the promise that nothing truly bad can happen, is constantly tested. One of the clearest examples of this lies in the existence of the void. It is not a punishment handed out by villains, nor is it a danger one chooses to face. Instead, it is an unstable crack in reality, waiting to swallow those who don't fit in. The people who fall into it aren't evil, and they don't deserve it. They are simply forgotten, erased, because they no longer make sense in Elmore's fragile logic. This is more than just unsettling, it is terrifying, because it means that the rules of safety don't protect anyone, not even the innocent. Take Rob, for instance. Once just another background character, he was pulled into the void and forever changed by it. His body became scarred, his mind consumed by knowledge of the cracks in reality. He is living proof that even small mistakes, even the act of simply being overlooked, can alter your entire existence. Rob's story is not just about villainy. It's about what happens when the fragile rules of Elmore fail to hold you up. And it isn't just the void that reveals this lack of safety. Think of the way time works in Elmore. In most cartoons, time resets each episode. No matter what happens, the world returns to normal. But in Gumball, actions often have permanent consequences. Characters lose jobs, friendships fracture, relationships shift, and these changes stick. There is no reset button, no invisible rule to undo the damage. Mistakes linger like scars. The lack of a safety net makes every moment feel sharper, every choice heavier. Even the way characters are designed reflects this fragility. A simple glitch in their form can turn playful animation into a nightmare. A character can stretch too far, break apart, or morph into something unrecognizable. Unlike other cartoons, there is no assurance they will snap back into shape unharmed. Sometimes they do, but other times the transformation lingers, leaving behind a sense that something has gone wrong on a deeper level. This unpredictability changes the way we watch the show. We don't just laugh at the characters' mistakes, we worry about them. We wonder what the cost will be, whether this time the fall will be too far, the glitch too severe, the erasure too final. That underlying tension gives Elmore its hidden darkness. It tells us that the rules of safety are not strong enough to protect anyone for long. And maybe that's why the show resonates so deeply. Because beneath the humor and chaos, there is a reflection of real life. Our world, too, promises safety that is not always there. We build routines, laws, and structures to keep us safe, But sometimes they fail. Sometimes accidents change everything. Sometimes people vanish from our lives without explanation. Sometimes the rules we trusted simply break apart. Elmore mirrors this truth in its own surreal, colorful way, wrapping deep unease in bright, playful colors. The lesson it offers is quiet but chilling. Just because something feels safe doesn't mean it truly is. And in Elmore, more than anywhere else, safety is only ever temporary. Think for a moment about how children often play games. There are rules in those games. Take turns. Don't step outside the line. Count to 10 before you hide. These rules are comforting because they give structure, a sense of fairness, a feeling that if you follow them, you'll be safe. But Elmore is not that kind of playground. In Elmore, the rules bend and break without warning. You can follow them perfectly and still lose. You can try to play fair and still vanish into nothing. The illusion of safety exists, but it cannot be trusted. One of the most striking examples is how Elmore sometimes discards characters entirely. They aren't given farewells. They aren't written out gently. They are simply removed as though they never mattered. Miss Simeon, Banana Joe's father, Molly Collins. So many side characters slip into the background or disappear altogether. For some, the show eventually explains it through the void. For others, it doesn't bother to explain at all. It's as if the world itself has erased them, deciding they no longer serve a purpose. That unpredictability carries an eerie weight. If a world can forget its own people, how safe can anyone truly feel? This lack of permanence also infects relationships. Friendships and romances are not guaranteed protection from harm. They bend and strain under the pressure of mistakes. Sometimes they even break. Gumball and Penny, for instance, face real struggles that change how they see each other. Nicole and Richard's marriage, while comical, often teeters on the edge of collapse. Even Darwin, who seems endlessly loyal, finds himself questioning bonds. Unlike in other cartoons where relationships are always patched up neatly, Elmore lets the cracks remain visible. The rules of everything will be okay simply don't apply here. The lack of protective rules also shows itself in the environment. The town of Elmore can change at any moment. Roads vanish, buildings collapse, backgrounds glitch, entire neighborhoods shift. The world doesn't obey the rules of stability we expect from a setting. It is as if the town itself is alive, reshaping, erasing, and rewriting itself without caring about the people who live there. To walk through Elmore is to accept that the ground may disappear beneath you, that the walls may suddenly move, that your home may not be there tomorrow. Even mortality works differently here. Characters do get hurt, and sometimes those injuries don't heal the way they should. The show has a playful way of ignoring consequences when it wants to, but at other times, it leans into them fully. Someone can lose a piece of themselves figuratively or literally and never get it back. The danger of permanent harm always lingers in the background. It doesn't matter how colorful the world looks. It is capable of cruelty. What makes this even more unsettling is the way the characters themselves treat it as normal. They panic in the moment, but they rarely stop to ask why their world is so unstable. They accept erasure, glitches, shifting relationships, and fragile safety as part of life. And in a way, that makes it more haunting for us. Because it means this instability isn't just a rare occurrence. It is the foundation of their reality. They live with it because they have no choice. And yet, this fragility creates something strangely beautiful, too. Because the rules don't protect anyone, every moment in Elmore feels more precious. A joke between friends, a meal at the Wattersons' table, A small act of kindness, these moments shine brighter because they are not guaranteed. They could be erased tomorrow, swallowed by the void, undone by a glitch. The absence of safety makes joy feel sharper, more fleeting, more real. That duality is the heart of Elmore. On the surface, it is silly and lighthearted. But underneath, it whispers that nothing is promised. It reminds us that the rules we trust in, whether in stories or in life, are only illusions, and illusions can always break. Perhaps the most unnerving part of this lack of safety is how it mirrors the fragility of our own world. We grow up believing in rules, too, that if we work hard, if we are kind, if we follow what society tells us, we will be protected. But the truth is, life doesn't always honor that promise. Sometimes people vanish from our lives without explanation. Sometimes things break and never return to the way they were. Sometimes the ground shifts beneath us, and all we can do is stumble forward. Elmore, for all its absurdity, reflects that unsettling truth more honestly than most stories are willing to. Take the void as an example. It is presented as a place that swallows up inconsistencies, things the universe deems too strange, too unnecessary, and too out of place. But when you think about it, this is no different from how memory works. People are forgotten all the time. Entire histories are lost. The void is terrifying because it is not only a fictional danger, it is a mirror of how reality forgets. Elmore just makes that forgetting visible. When Molly Collins falls into the void, she represents every forgotten classmate, every erased detail of our own lives that no one notices disappearing. Then there is the question of identity. The rules of identity in Elmore are fluid, even unstable. Characters can change form, lose themselves, or become someone entirely new. Banana Barbara sees the future, but cannot always act upon it, trapped by the rules of fate. Rob loses his shape and becomes a glitch, no longer recognized by the world that once knew him. Even Gumball himself shifts constantly, hero one moment, fool the next, victim the next. The rules of who a person is do not hold firm here. And perhaps that is the most fragile thing of all, to live in a world where you cannot trust your own continuity, where your essence might be rewritten tomorrow. The comedy of the show often disguises this instability. We laugh when a background character vanishes mid-scene or when a bizarre rule suddenly contradicts itself. But beneath the laughter is a darker realization. The world of Elmore does not value permanence. Its laws are not written to protect, but to entertain some higher logic. We cannot see whether that logic is the writers, the universe, or something deeper. The townspeople are, in a sense, prisoners of that truth. And yet, like any prisoner who grows used to their cage, they normalize it. They keep going, they find joy, make friends, fall in love, play games, dream dreams. The fragility doesn't erase those things, it amplifies them. When you know the rules won't save you, the small kindnesses become louder. The fragile bonds feel sacred. The laughter becomes a kind of defiance against the instability pressing in. There is a quiet lesson in that. We often search for safety in rules, but rules can be broken. What matters, perhaps, is not the protection they promise, but the meaning we create in the spaces where they fail. Gumball and Darwin's friendship, Nicole's fierce love for her family, even Richard's bumbling attempts at fatherhood. These things shine not because they are permanent, but because they are vulnerable. They are imperfect and unprotected, and that makes them real. In this way, Elmore's cruelty is also its gift. It strips away the illusion that anything is guaranteed, and in doing so, it teaches us to treasure what is fragile. Every joke could be the last. every friendship could be erased. Every rule could collapse without warning. And yet, the characters keep living. They keep laughing. They keep reaching for each other, even in a world that can swallow them whole at any moment. That is what makes Elmore so haunting. It is not just the glitches or the void or the instability of its laws. It is the way life persists despite them. The way fragile things grow even in a place where nothing is secure. The way beauty still blooms in a world that offers no promises. And as we watch, we can't help but recognize that this is not just their world. It is ours too. When you step back and look at Elmore as a whole, you begin to see how fragile the very idea of order is. The rules aren't a safety net, they are a performance, a kind of stage backdrop painted to make life seem steady, even though everyone inside knows it could rip at any second. What makes it truly eerie is how casually the characters accept this. No one is marching in protest against the void. No one is trying to repair the glitches. Life simply continues, because what else can it do? It's unsettling in the same way that our own lives can be unsettling. We are told stories of fairness and balance, of systems that are supposed to catch us when we fall. Yet when cracks appear, we too often just carry on. We laugh, we eat dinner, we watch our shows, and we hope the ground doesn't shift again. Elmore exaggerates this truth until it is impossible to ignore. Think of Richard, the father of the Watterson family. On the surface, he is silly, irresponsible, and carefree. But he is also strangely untouched by the world's fragility. The laws of Elmore bend around him, sometimes even more than they do for anyone else. He is not aware of the instability, and in some ways, that ignorance protects him. But Nicole, his wife, is different. She knows the world's chaos all too well. She works constantly, fights constantly, tries to shield her family from its dangers. She believes in rules, hard work, discipline, persistence. Yet time and again her rules do not save her. Her sacrifices go unnoticed. Her fierce determination cannot erase the instability that surrounds her. In Nicole, we see the futility of trying to enforce order in a world where order is a suggestion at best. Darwin and Gumball, too, learn this lesson again and again. They try to follow rules or bend them or even outsmart them. Sometimes they succeed in the moment, but the victories are temporary. The glitches return, the dangers resurface. The void continues to pull at the edges of their lives. No matter what they do, the rules will not hold. Yet instead of despair, they often find laughter. And perhaps that is the truest form of rebellion in Elmore, knowing the rules cannot protect you, but choosing to find joy anyway. What makes this darkness so powerful is its quietness. The show doesn't announce it. There are no dramatic speeches about futility, no grand warnings about the void. It's just there in the background, woven into every episode. A character disappears without explanation. A law of physics bends the wrong way. A rule contradicts itself. And then the story continues, as if nothing happened. That quietness is what makes it stick in our minds. It feels real, because real life rarely warns us either. And so Elmore becomes a kind of mirror. A funhouse mirror, perhaps, bent and exaggerated, but still reflecting something true about us. We want rules to protect us, but the truth is, they never fully can. Our safety is never guaranteed. Our place in the world is never fixed. Things vanish. Things break. Sometimes for reasons we will never know. But here's the twist, and perhaps the strange comfort. The fragility doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it precious. When nothing is promised, every moment becomes more valuable. When rules cannot protect us, the connections we make with others become our anchor. Elmore shows us a world where protection is an illusion, but meaning is something the characters create for themselves in spite of that. That is the secret buried in this segment of the story. The rules are not guardians. They are fragile threads, easily torn. But what the characters build together, friendship, family, laughter that is real, that is what endures, even when the laws of their world collapse. And maybe, as we watch Gumball and his family stumble, fight, and laugh through the instability, we are reminded of our own lives. We too live in a world where rules fail, where safety is never guaranteed. But if Elmore teaches us anything, it is that the fragility of our world is not a reason to despair. It is a reason to hold tighter to the things we love, to laugh louder in the face of absurdity, and to keep living even when the ground feels unsteady. So when we think about the rules that don't protect anyone, the real darkness of Elmore isn't just that those rules are fragile. It's that the characters know this and live on anyway. They carry the weight of that fragility with a strange kind of grace, turning it into comedy, into connection, into a life that, while unstable, still matters deeply. And that is what lingers when the laughter fades. The quiet awareness that nothing is guaranteed, and yet everything is worth treasuring. When we think of Elmore, most of us remember the laughter. The fast-talking, colorful cast, the bizarre adventures, the twist and bend reality until it barely resembles anything familiar. But tucked within that carnival of absurdity are shadows. Characters who linger at the edges of the story, who slip in and out of comedy to reveal something darker. Villains who are never just villains, but reflections of fears and truths we would rather not face. One of the most striking figures is Rob. At first, he was nothing more than a background character, a face without meaning. Forgotten by the world, he began to glitch, his body twisting into jagged edges, his voice broken by static. In many ways, Rob is the embodiment of what happens when Elmore's instability swallows someone whole. He is not evil because he chooses to be, but because he was abandoned by the rules of the universe itself. His villainy is born out of absence, of being overlooked, of being erased. That kind of horror is far more unsettling than any simple bad guy. It is the horror of not being seen, not being remembered, not mattering. Every time Rob steps into a story, the tone shifts. The comedy does not disappear, but it takes on a sharper edge. His glitching form reminds us of the fragility of Elmore, the cracks beneath the painted surface. And his desire for revenge is not just against Gumball, but against the entire system that allowed him to be discarded. He is a villain, yes, but he is also a wound made visible. Watching him, we feel the ache of loneliness, the fear of being irrelevant. That is why his presence lingers long after the episode ends. But Rob is not alone in casting shadows. There is also jealousy, a shapeless green specter that attaches itself to the Wattersons. On the surface, jealousy is played for laughs, an exaggerated, ghostly figure who whispers poisonous thoughts into people's ears. Yet underneath the slapstick, jealousy embodies something real and dangerous. It is the emotion that corrodes relationships, that feeds on comparisons, that makes even love feel fragile. In Elmore, where rules already offer no safety, jealousy becomes another layer of instability. It turns family members against one another, not because of any outside threat, but because of the darkness that lives inside them. What makes jealousy so chilling is how recognizable it feels. Unlike Rob's glitching or the abstract dangers of the void, jealousy is something we know intimately. Everyone has felt it, even if only for a moment. And the show does not let us look away from how destructive it can be. The green ghost may vanish when the joke is over, but the unease it leaves behind is real. Then there is the haunting figure of Banana Barbara, a character whose role is subtler, but no less unsettling. She has visions of the future, glimpses of what is coming. But instead of using this gift to guide or protect, she is bound by it. The visions isolate her, trapping her in knowledge that she cannot always change. In this sense, she becomes a shadow villain, not because she acts maliciously, but because her existence reminds us of inevitability. There are some things you cannot prevent, no matter how much you know. Her paintings and warnings echo through the story, a reminder that destiny, too, can be a kind of prison. And lurking even deeper in the folds of Elmore's darkness is a different kind of villain altogether, the system itself. The void, the forgotten laws of physics, the inconsistencies that erase characters and rewrite reality. These forces are not embodied in a single face, yet they function as the most powerful antagonists in the entire story. They do not laugh, they do not gloat, they simply exist, swallowing those who fall through the cracks. The terror they bring is in their indifference. A human villain can be bargained with, fought against, even forgiven. But the system of Elmore is beyond appeal. It is a villain without a heart, without malice, without mercy. As we drift through these shadows, the question begins to form. Are Elmore's villains truly evil, or are they symptoms of a broken world? Rob is a glitch. Jealousy is an emotion. Banana Barbara is a prisoner of inevitability, and the void is an emptiness. None of these are simple monsters. They are reflections of deeper truths, forgotten people, corrosive feelings, the inevitability of time, and the indifference of the universe. And perhaps that is why they haunt us more than any cackling villain ever could. If we follow the shadows further, we encounter other figures who wear the mask of comedy, but leave behind a residue of unease. Consider Principal Brown. At first glance, he is simply a bumbling authority figure, awkward and insecure, fumbling his way through the daily chaos of Elmore Junior High. But beneath the jokes, there is something unsettling about him. He is in charge, yet he is never truly in control. His attempts at guidance often collapse. His rules feel hollow, and his relationship with Miss Simeon carries a strange intensity that borders on sinister. Brown represents authority stripped of strength, a reminder that those meant to guide us may be just as lost as we are. Miss Simeon herself embodies a different sort of shadow. She is stern, bitter, and often cruel, making her the classic teacher-turned-antagonist. Yet her cruelty is not cartoon villainy. It comes from a place of exhaustion, perhaps even despair. She has been teaching for decades, watching generation after generation pass by. And somewhere along the line, she gave up on hope. Her meanness becomes a kind of armor against the futility she feels. When we see her yelling at children, punishing Gumball and Darwin for their antics, what we are really seeing is someone trying desperately to cling to a sense of purpose in a world that keeps slipping away from her. She is not frightening because she is powerful, but because she is powerless, taking out her frustration on those weaker than her. Even characters like Mr. Small, the gentle hippie guidance counselor, can take on a darker light. His cheerful advice, often laced with pseudo-spiritual ramblings, seems harmless until you realize how disconnected he truly is from reality. He offers peace, but he cannot provide solutions. He offers comfort, but he avoids the real problems. In this sense, he represents the danger of escapism, the shadow that comes from ignoring the cracks in the world rather than facing them. And then, of course, there are the parents beyond the Watterson family. Characters like Tobias's father, rich and overbearing, who embodies greed and entitlement, or Alan's parents, who seem perfect on the surface but hint at pressures and expectations that weigh heavily on their child. These minor figures may not seem like villains, but they add to the tapestry of shadows in Elmore, each one reflecting a flaw in the systems we rely on: greed, neglect, selfishness, apathy. They remind us that sometimes the scariest villains are not the ones who glitch or haunt, but the ones who smile and call themselves normal. The fascinating thing about these figures is how easily the show blends their menace with comedy. One moment we laugh at Principal Brown's incompetence. The next we realize how unsettling it is to have such a fragile figure in charge of children. We laugh at Miss Simeon's bitterness, then feel the weight of her hopelessness. The humor disarms us, but when the laughter fades, what lingers is discomfort. We are left asking ourselves, why do these characters feel so familiar? Why do their flaws remind us of people we have known, or even parts of ourselves? That familiarity is what gives the shadows of Elmore their depth. Rob glitches and jealousy whispers, but the everyday authority figures, the tired teachers, the greedy parents, these are the villains that feel closest to home. They don't need supernatural powers or cosmic voids to frighten us. Their power lies in how ordinary they are. And just like the void or the glitches in reality, these everyday shadows reveal the same unsettling truths. The systems we trust are fragile. Authority figures may not protect us. Teachers may give up on us. Parents may let us down. Guidance may be empty words. In a world as absurd as Elmore, the real horror is not the monsters hiding in the corners. It is the realization that the people we expect to keep us safe are often too flawed, too tired, or too broken to do so. The comedy makes this digestible. It keeps the shadows from overwhelming us. But the message seeps through all the same. Every laugh at Principal Brown, every joke about Miss Simeon, every absurd lesson from Mr. Small, they all leave behind an echo. A reminder that behind the bright colors and silly antics, Elmore's shadows are always watching. When we widen our gaze from Elmore's authority figures and broken guides, we find ourselves staring into something much darker, the shadows that reach beyond the town itself. These are not just flawed people or toxic emotions. These are the forces that seem to exist outside of comprehension, shaping the world in ways no one inside it can fully resist. They are villains in the truest sense, not because they want to be, but because their very existence bends life into fear and instability. One of these is the void itself. It is easy to dismiss the void as just another strange joke in a world of strange jokes, a big empty pocket where forgotten things go. But when you sit with it, the concept is bone-deep chilling. The void swallows anything deemed inconsistent, anything the universe no longer wants to acknowledge. Entire people, places, and memories fall inside, erased as though they never were. This is a villain unlike any other, because it has no face, no voice, and no intention. It does not hate. It does not rage. It simply erases. And that indifference is what makes it terrifying. Rob, who was cast into the void and returned broken, carries its shadow wherever he goes. He is the proof that the void is not just a silly gag. It changes people. It warps them. It leaves them aching with the knowledge that they once mattered and now do not. In many ways, Rob is not the villain, he is the victim. The void is the true antagonist, a silent predator that feeds on irrelevance. And when you think about it too long, you realize how closely this mirrors real life. How many things, people, and memories have slipped into the void of time, forgotten not because they deserve to be, but simply because the world moved on. Another figure who stretches into Elmore's shadow is jealousy. We already spoke of jealousy as an emotion embodied in ghostly form. But what makes this entity particularly sinister is how easily it takes root. Unlike the void, jealousy doesn't erase, it corrupts. It seeps into the cracks between relationships, twisting love into bitterness and trust into suspicion. It whispers lies that feel like truths. It thrives in insecurity, which every character in Elmore has in abundance. Watching jealousy work is uncomfortable because it is one of the few villains that needs no supernatural explanation. It exists in us too, gnawing quietly at the bonds we hold dear. And then, deeper still, there are characters like Alan. On the surface, Alan the Balloon is one of the kindest and most perfect members of Elmore. Always cheerful, always positive, floating gently above the chaos. But when you look closer, Alan represents a different sort of darkness, the suffocating weight of perfection. He becomes a mirror for the pressure of always being good, always being selfless, always smiling, even when life is heavy. His villainy, if it can be called that, is subtle. It is the way he makes others feel inferior, the way his flawlessness isolates him from genuine connection. Alan is not malicious, but he is a shadow all the same, a reminder that perfection can be just as destructive as overt cruelty. The most chilling villains of Elmore, however, are the ones that blur the line between comedy and nightmare. Think of the joy virus, that episode where laughter itself becomes an infection. At first, it seems harmless, contagious joy spreading from one character to the next. But soon it spirals into horror, with wide, frozen smiles masking suffering and fear. The villain here is not a person, but an idea, that even happiness can be twisted, that even joy can be a mask for destruction. Watching characters laugh uncontrollably until it becomes painful is disturbing precisely because it hides beneath the skin of something we usually welcome. And in this way, Elmore's shadows keep teaching us the same lesson. Villains here are rarely straightforward. They are not grand overlords with armies and speeches. They are forgotten faces, toxic emotions, unattainable ideals, corrupted joys, and indifferent systems. They are everywhere and nowhere, always creeping in at the edges of the story. And that is what makes them powerful. They cannot simply be defeated because they are not separate from the world. They are part of it. That blending is what leaves the aftertaste of unease when the episode ends. The laughter fades, the credits roll, but in the back of your mind, something lingers. You think of Rob's glitching, of jealousy's whispers, of the frozen grins of the joy virus, and you realize that these are not just shadows of Elmore. They are shadows we carry too. When we gather all of these figures together, the void, Rob, jealousy, the tired teachers, the corrupted joy is what we see is not a rogues gallery in the traditional sense. There are no capes or crowns, no dramatic declarations of conquest. Instead, Elmore's villains form a mosaic of fragility, loneliness, and inevitability. They are not grand conquerors. They are cracks in the foundation. This is what makes them so frightening. In a typical story, villains are defeated. Heroes rise, villains fall, and the world resets into order. But in Elmore, that promise is never offered. Rob is not gone. Jealousy can always return. The void continues to expand in silence. Even the everyday figures, the Principal Browns and Miss Simeons of the world, remain in their roles, flawed and unredeemed. There is no final victory, only survival. And survival in Elmore is a strange thing. The characters laugh, they play, they move forward, but the shadows never leave. It is like living in a house with hairline cracks along the walls. At a glance, everything is fine, but you know the structure is fragile. Every villain is a reminder of that fragility. Every shadow whispers that stability is only an illusion. What makes this unsettling truth easier to sit with is the way the show cloaks it in absurdity. We laugh at Rob's glitching because the animation is ridiculous. We laugh at jealousy's ghostly form because it is exaggerated. We laugh at Principal Brown's fumbling or Miss Simeon's bitterness because they are presented as caricatures. But once the laughter fades, the idea remains. These figures are still there, haunting the corners, unresolved. And perhaps this is the most important function of Elmore's villains. They are teachers, even if they never mean to be. Rob teaches us about neglect and the pain of being forgotten. Jealousy shows us how easily love can twist into something sharp. Miss Simeon reminds us what happens when hope is abandoned. The void forces us to confront the inevitability of being erased, whether by time or memory. Even the joy virus, absurd as it seems, shows us that too much of even a good thing can become suffocating. None of these are easy lessons, but they are lessons wrapped in comedy, softened by laughter, made bearable by the fact that they unfold in a cartoon world rather than our own. Yet they stick with us because they ring true. And in that truth lies their power. So when we talk about the villains of Elmore's shadows, what we are really talking about is reflection. Each one is a distorted mirror of something real: emotions, flaws, systems, inevitabilities. We see them in exaggerated form, and in doing so, we recognize them in ourselves. The darkness of Elmore is not in the monsters it creates, but in how closely those monsters resemble us. And maybe that is why the shadows of Elmore feel so haunting when we try to fall asleep at night. They remind us that villains are not always strangers with sharp teeth and glowing eyes. Sometimes they are the quiet feelings we cannot shake, the systems that fail us, the memories that slip away, the cracks we pretend not to notice. Sometimes the villains are not outside us at all, but within. Yet as heavy as this sounds, Elmore never abandons its light. For every shadow, there is a joke. For every villain, there is friendship. For every crack in the world, there is a burst of color. That balance is what makes the darkness bearable. The show teaches us that even in the presence of villains, whether they are ghosts, glitches, or quiet disappointments, life can still be silly, beautiful, and worth living. And perhaps that is the final lesson of Elmore's shadows. The villains will always be there. They cannot all be defeated. But neither can they erase the joy of a family dinner, the warmth of a friendship, the laughter that erupts even in the strangest of times. The shadows are permanent, but so is the light that pushes against them. So as we drift away from this part of the story, let us carry both truths with us. The villains of Elmore remind us that darkness is never far away, but they also remind us that laughter, connection, and resilience are just as enduring. And in a fragile world, the balance is everything. There are places in Elmore that feel familiar, safe, and colorful. The bright classrooms of Elmore Junior High, the cozy, chaotic rooms of the Watterson household, the streets lined with strange but oddly comforting neighbors. And then, in contrast, there is the void, a place that is not a place, a space that feels like an absence, yet hums with its own quiet menace. The void is not introduced like most locations. It does not have the warmth of a setting we are meant to inhabit. Instead, it appears like a crack in the fabric of the show itself, a reminder that even the cartoon world we are watching has holes. It is described as a dimension that erases mistakes, an empty realm where anomalies, forgotten memories, and unwanted things are cast away. But the way it is shown tells us much more than the definition could ever capture. Visually, the void is strange, an endless expanse of shifting color, neither completely dark nor entirely light. It feels infinite, but also strangely suffocating. Objects float within it, remnants of things that no longer belong. These objects are absurd on the surface, an old-school mascot costume, broken toys, half-formed characters, but the longer you stare, the heavier they feel. Each one is a relic of something someone decided no longer had value. Each one is a piece of Elmore's forgotten heart. When Gumball and Darwin stumble into this space, the tone of the story changes instantly. There is no laughter in the void. Even the boys, usually so quick to crack a joke or bumble through danger, are subdued here. The void is not a villain to fight or a puzzle to solve. It is inevitability given form. It is the show's way of asking us to think about what happens when things are discarded. Not just objects, but memories, moments, and even people. The strangest part of the void is how quietly it exists in the show's universe. Nobody really speaks of it. Nobody seems to acknowledge it, yet its presence explains so much. Why do certain inconsistencies in the world remain unanswered? Why are some characters forgotten between seasons, never to return? The void has quietly taken them. The show builds an excuse for its own narrative gaps, but it does so in a way that makes those gaps feel eerie rather than harmless. In a way, the void is not just Elmore's forgotten heart, it is also ours. Because when we watch those discarded relics floating in the emptiness, we are reminded of our own forgotten things. The toys that were once beloved but now collect dust in an attic. The friendships that slipped away without a goodbye. The embarrassing moments we try to erase from memory but still haunt us when the room is quiet. The void is a metaphor for forgetting, for erasure, for the unsettling truth that not everything we experience will be remembered. And what makes this darker still is the suggestion that the void is not natural. It feels designed. Someone or something is curating what belongs and what must be thrown away. This makes the void not only a space of forgetting, but also of control. If mistakes are erased, who decides what counts as a mistake? If anomalies are removed, who decides what is too strange to belong? In Elmore, these questions remain unanswered, and that silence only deepens the unease. The more time we spend with the void, the more it feels alive. Not in the sense of a creature with eyes or teeth, but in the way an absence can pulse like a presence. It swallows what should not be, and in doing so, it gains a kind of shape, a forgotten shape, a heart that beats quietly in the background of Elmore, pumping absence into a world full of color. The void is not just an abstract space. It has rules, if you can even call them that, and those rules make it all the more unsettling. When Gumball and Darwin find themselves trapped there, they realize quickly that they are not welcome visitors. The void does not want to be explored. It does not want to be questioned. It wants anomalies erased, smoothed away like chalk wiped from a board. And in its mind, curiosity itself can be an anomaly. Think about that for a moment, a place where simply noticing the cracks is enough to make you vanish into them. That is what makes the void more terrifying than any villain in Elmore. It does not need to fight. It only needs to wait for you to slip, for your presence to feel unnecessary, for your memory to fade just slightly in the minds of others. Then quietly and without ceremony, you are gone. The people of Elmore seem largely unaware of this looming presence, yet it touches all of them. Some characters appear in one episode, play a role, and then are never seen again. In most shows, we accept this as normal storytelling. But in the Amazing World of Gumball, the Void gives us a chilling explanation. These characters weren't written out. They were erased. Their stories cut short. Their existence dissolved into nothingness. This subtle twist forces us to view the comedy in a new light. A throwaway gag about a one-off character suddenly feels heavier when you consider they might have been pulled into the void the moment we stop laughing at them. Even a simple background object, something animated into life for just one joke, could be swallowed once it outlives its purpose. The world becomes fragile, not because of chaos, but because of absence. The episode where the boys confront Rob inside the void is especially telling. Rob himself is an anomaly, a character who slipped into obscurity only to claw his way back with an awareness of what was taken from him. He becomes distorted, bitter, desperate. It is the void that changed him. The knowledge that he was nearly erased. That glimpse of the abyss broke something in him, and once you see how easily everything can be erased, how can you ever laugh at Elmore's silliness in the same way again? Rob's struggle reminds us that erasure is not clean. It leaves behind jagged edges. He is proof that the void does not always succeed in smoothing over mistakes. Sometimes what it discards comes back warped, carrying the scars of being unwanted. His role as a villain becomes less about evil and more about survival, a cry against the suffocating silence of being forgotten. What makes the void's presence so haunting is its quiet inevitability. It doesn't storm into the story with flashing lights or dramatic music. It lurks, patient and silent, waiting for the narrative to leave something behind. And when it does, the void simply claims it. That restraint makes it more terrifying than the most violent storm. It is not rage that drives it, but indifference. Indifference can feel colder than hate because it denies even the dignity of recognition. And then there are the objects within. Each floating relic becomes a symbol of lost importance. Imagine stumbling upon your childhood drawing, one you loved dearly, now adrift in endless emptiness because someone deemed it unworthy of keeping. Imagine a pet, a friend, or even a version of yourself quietly erased and filed away under mistake. The void takes these ideas and makes them visible. Its shelves of forgotten things whisper that nothing is safe from being labeled as unnecessary. In this way, the void is not just a location, but also a philosophy. It asks a question we often avoid. What happens to the parts of life that no longer serve us? Do they vanish? Or do they continue somewhere unseen, drifting just out of reach? Elmore's surreal humor makes the question easier to ask, but no less haunting. The void may look colorful and strange, but beneath that shifting texture lies the same fear we carry in our own lives, the fear of being forgotten. The void's deepest horror lies not in what it takes, but in how it changes the way we think about memory itself. To be forgotten is not the same as to be destroyed. Something destroyed is gone completely, yet something forgotten still exists somewhere, lingering in silence, unseen and unacknowledged. The void captures that strange in-between state. When we watch Gumball and Darwin drift past fragments of discarded lives, we feel a deep, aching familiarity. It looks surreal, but it mirrors the way our own minds leave things behind. Think of the people you once knew only to lose touch. The names you can no longer recall, though the faces still appear in dreams. The objects that once defined your world but now lie buried in a box you never open. The void is the physical embodiment of those mental corners, the dusty shelves of the subconscious where half-remembered things gather. Elmore has simply given it shape, letting us peek at what is usually invisible. And in doing so, the show makes us complicit. Every time we laugh at a throwaway joke or shrug when a character disappears, we are participating in the act of forgetting. The void feeds on our inattention, our willingness to let the unimportant fade. That might sound heavy for a cartoon, but that is precisely the brilliance of it. Beneath the comedy, the Amazing World of Gumball constantly reminds us that laughter does not erase unease, it only disguises it for a moment. Rob's existence within this forgotten heart drives the metaphor further. He is not just a villain or anomaly. He is the audience's guilt made flesh. He remembers when we did not. He knows he was discarded, and he resents us for it as much as he resents Elmore itself. His fractured appearance, with lines cracking across his body, mirrors the cracks in the narrative. He is a scar that refuses to heal because the wound of being forgotten is not easily closed. Watching him, we are forced to wonder what other characters could have had a voice, a purpose, a story, if only the void had not swallowed them. The void also makes us question who has control over the world of Elmore. The explanation that it exists to erase mistakes suggests a caretaker of sorts, some unseen power that decides what counts as an error. But is this force benevolent, or is it something more sinister? Is the void tidying the world to keep it functioning, or is it cleansing it out of cruelty, stripping away anything that doesn't fit? The absence of an answer gives it a chilling power. Sometimes what we don't know is more frightening than what we do. This shadow of control resonates with something deeper in us. In our own lives, we often feel the hand of erasure. Cultures forget parts of their history. Families lose stories of ancestors to time. Even in the digital age, where information feels eternal, things vanish, deleted accounts, corrupted files, websites, swallowed by the collapse of servers. In that sense, the void is not fiction at all. It is a metaphor for the constant erosion of existence, whether in Elmore or in our world. What makes the void even more unsettling is the way it sometimes seems to notice those who notice it. When Gumball and Darwin stumble upon its secrets, the world of Elmore itself begins to glitch. The characters they thought they knew no longer behave predictably. Backgrounds flicker. The usual rules of cartoon physics feel strained, as though the void does not like being observed. It is not content to remain a backdrop. It presses against the walls of the story, reminding us that reality, even in animation, is never as stable as we want it to be. And then there are the children's reactions. Gumball and Darwin are endlessly curious, endlessly playful. But in the void, their energy collapses into something closer to dread. They know instinctively that this place is not meant for them. Their jokes feel quieter, their movements slower, and their eyes wider. Watching them, we see the innocence of childhood brush against the inevitability of forgetting. It is like watching a child discover for the first time that not everything can last forever. The void strips away the protective layer of comedy that usually shields the show. It leaves us with raw silence, colored only by drifting fragments of what used to be. And in that silence, the questions grow louder. Who decides what is forgotten? What does it mean to live in a world where the forgotten do not truly disappear, but remain suspended, haunting the edges of existence. Perhaps the most disturbing implication is this. If the void contains everything forgotten, then it contains us, too, eventually. Every version of ourselves that no longer exists, every childhood self, every past mistake, every fleeting moment that we no longer hold on to drifts there, unseen but not gone. Elmore gives us a way to visualize this truth. And once you see it, you cannot stop thinking about what might be floating just beyond reach. The longer we sit with the void, the more we realize it is not just a place, but an idea. In Elmore, it functions as the great eraser, the hidden hand that sweeps away anything that doesn't fit. But for us watching, it becomes a mirror. We see in it the way memory falters, the way stories fade, the way time itself discards what it no longer needs. The void is a reminder that nothing is permanent, not in a cartoon, not in the world, not even in ourselves. This becomes especially clear when we notice how the void touches identity. In Elmore, to be erased means to lose not just your presence in the story, but your very sense of self. You are no longer remembered as a person or character. You become a fragment, stripped of meaning, drifting in endless limbo. It is the purest form of loneliness, to exist without being recognized. The forgotten objects and characters floating there are not dead, not alive, but suspended in a half-existence. And in that half-existence, we find an echo of our own fear that, if we are forgotten, do we truly matter? Rob embodies this fear most vividly. His journey is not about power or domination like most villains, but about clawing back an identity stolen from him. His rage, his desperation, his distorted form, these are the scars left by erasure. He is the child of the void, and through him we glimpse the cruelty of being deemed unnecessary. Yet his existence is also a strange kind of triumph. By resisting the pull of the void, by refusing to stay forgotten, he forces Elmore to reckon with what it tried to discard. Rob is the unwanted memory that refuses to stay silent, the reminder that nothing erased is truly gone. This makes the void all the more unsettling because it implies permanence. Once something is sent there, it cannot be undone. You may claw your way back, but you will never be whole again. You will always carry the fracture lines, the knowledge of what was lost. In this sense, the void is like trauma. It swallows moments, but even when they resurface, they return twisted, marked by the time they spent in silence. And what of the audience? The void does not only haunt Elmore, it haunts us too. Every time we stop thinking about the show, every time an episode fades from memory, every time we let a detail slip away, it is as though we are feeding the void ourselves. We decide without realizing it what parts of Elmore we will remember and what will drift into obscurity. And in this decision lies the chilling suggestion that we too are part of the mechanism that erases. This might explain why the void feels so personal. It is not simply the show explaining its continuity errors. It is the show holding up a mirror. The jokes we laughed at once and then forgot, the characters we barely noticed, the objects we saw for a single moment and then dismissed, all of these become part of the void. Our neglect shapes it. Our fading memory gives it form. The more we forget, the more powerful it becomes. And perhaps that is the true darkness hidden at the heart of Elmore. The town looks bright, chaotic, funny, even absurd. But underneath there is always the quiet hum of the void, reminding us that color fades, laughter fades, and even stories fade. The Wattersons may run endlessly from one absurd misadventure to another, but even their lives are fragile threads in a fabric that can be unraveled without warning. The void asks us a question we rarely dare to answer. If everything we know and love could be erased, what makes it real? Is it the memory of others? Is it the act of being witnessed? Or is it something deeper, something that survives even when the world stops paying attention? In a sense, the void becomes not just a horror, but also a mystery, one that whispers of truths too large for Elmore or for us to fully contain. And yet, in the quietest moments, there is a strange comfort hidden in its vastness. If nothing is ever truly destroyed, if all forgotten things drift somewhere together, then perhaps the void is not just emptiness, but also a gathering place. A place where discarded toys and half-remembered friends still exist, side by side, waiting for someone to remember them again. In that sense, the void is both a curse and a sanctuary, both the wound of forgetting and the promise that nothing is ever entirely lost. As we leave this segment, let that thought settle over you like a blanket. The void may be frightening, but it is also honest. It shows us the fragility of memory, the impermanence of stories, and the quiet truth that what we forget still lingers, somewhere waiting. Elmore hides its heart in that forgotten place, and in doing so, it reflects our own hearts too, the parts filled with things we no longer see, but that never truly go away. When we first look at Elmore, it is tempting to think of it as a harmless playground. Bright colors splash across the screen, characters bounce and stretch with cartoon physics, and every corner seems alive with some new absurdity. But the more we sink into the world, the more a quiet heaviness begins to surface. Beneath the comedy, beneath the chaos, there is a constant whisper of questions too large for such a silly town. Questions about meaning, about memory, about whether anyone or anything truly matters. This is where Elmore transforms from just a cartoon setting into something stranger, something almost philosophical. The existential weight of Elmore is not presented directly. Nobody stands up and delivers a lecture about the fragility of life or the absurdity of existence. Instead, it comes in sideways, hidden within the laughter. The show sets up a joke, pulls us along with its rhythm, and then, just as we are laughing, it tilts the floor beneath our feet. Suddenly, the comedy reveals a void beneath it, a reminder that all the silliness is built on fragile ground. One of the clearest examples of this comes from the characters themselves. Gumball, Darwin, Anais, even Nicole and Richard, all of them live in a world that bends to absurd logic. They are crushed flat one moment and bounce back the next. They travel through time, break reality, and clash with beings beyond comprehension. And yet, for all this flexibility, they cannot escape the weight of small, human worries. They feel jealousy, heartbreak, regret, fear of being forgotten. These emotions strike harder because they arrive in a world where nothing else seems permanent. If even a cartoon world filled with impossible physics cannot protect its characters from existential dread, what does that say about our own fragile place in the universe? Episodes like The Question or The Meaning of Life lean into this directly. Gumball and Darwin search for answers that cannot be found, running in circles around philosophy and spirituality, only to land right back where they started. The comedy of it makes us laugh, but the lingering impression is something quieter. It is the realization that these big questions have no easy answers, not in Elmore, not in our world either. The characters may forget the weight of the journey as soon as the credits roll, but we, the viewers, carry that weight with us. This is part of what makes Elmore such an unsettling setting. The characters seem to live without memory of their heaviest moments. Catastrophic events reset. Horrors vanish. Continuity slips away like water through a sieve. But we, sitting outside of their reality, remember. We recall when the void swallowed anomalies, when Rob clawed back from obscurity, when entire rules of reality crumbled. We carry a history the characters cannot seem to hold on to, and in that imbalance, something begins to ache. It feels as though we know more than they do, and with that knowledge comes the quiet awareness that they are trapped in a cycle they will never escape. And perhaps that is the heaviest truth of all. Elmore is a world that cannot learn. Every reset, every forgotten trauma, every gag that covers up a deeper wound, all of it builds a sense that these characters are bound by something larger than themselves. They may question life, they may brush against the edge of understanding, but they will always snap back into the comedy routine, as if their universe demands it. To live in Elmore is to live without progress, to run in place on an endless treadmill of laughter and dread. When we recognize this, the show stops being just about cartoon antics and starts becoming something closer to a reflection of our own lives, because how often do we, too, repeat cycles? How often do we laugh off discomfort, only to feel it again later? How often do we sense the weight of questions we cannot answer, only to tuck them away until they rise again? In Elmore, these patterns are exaggerated, but they resonate because they are already familiar. The existential weight of Elmore becomes clearest in the way the show balances silliness with sudden depth. One moment, a joke about a talking potato or a misplaced sandwich will have us laughing. The next, that same potato might reveal an insecurity about purpose, or the sandwich might carry the fate of the universe. These sharp turns are not just comedic devices, they are reminders that meaning often hides in the absurd. Elmore thrives on this tension, keeping us laughing while slipping in truths that are harder to shake off. Take the episode The Nobody. At first it plays like a strange gag. A faceless figure creeps through the Watterson household, subtly altering their world. But the more we watch, the more uncomfortable it becomes. The Nobody is a manifestation of absence, a presence defined by what it lacks. The episode never quite explains what it is, and that's the point. It forces us to sit with the concept of non-existence intruding on daily life. What is more existential than the fear of nothingness slowly eroding the edges of who we are? Or consider the helmet. On the surface, it's a story about a magical object that grants incredible confidence to whoever wears it. But beneath the laughs is a harsh truth. The helmet doesn't actually give confidence. It only erases doubt. Without fear, hesitation, or self-awareness, the wearer charges forward blindly. The comedy lands in the chaos this creates, but the underlying question is sharp. Is confidence real if it comes from forgetting the risks of existence? Does meaning come from bravery or simply from ignorance of what might go wrong? Even the everyday episodes, ones without obvious supernatural elements, carry this weight. Think of The Word, where Darwin's honesty spirals into chaos because truth is too heavy for the people around him. Or The Promise, where a childhood vow becomes an unbearable burden. In both cases, ordinary life events reveal themselves as traps of meaning moments, when something small grows impossibly large because of the expectations we attach to it. These are not just gags, but reflections of how easily existence overwhelms us when we stop to think too hard about it. The most striking aspect of Elmore's existential weight, though, is how casually the characters encounter these truths. They rarely seem surprised by these surreal events around them. They accept glitches in reality, time loops, and cosmic horrors with the same shrug they give to a bad grade or a missing lunch. This nonchalance makes the world feel heavier for us as viewers. It is as though the characters have normalized their own absurdity, while we are left to feel the strangeness on their behalf. We see what they cannot, that their laughter often hides a trembling edge. Episodes that break the fourth wall push this idea even further. When characters become aware of their status as drawings, or when the show itself begins to glitch as if reality is fraying, the existential weight doubles. Suddenly, it isn't just Elmore asking questions of itself, it is the show asking questions of us. If their world is just a cartoon, and yet it can still carry dread, joy, and longing, what does that say about ours? How much of our own reality is built on fragile assumptions we rarely question? This balance between absurdity and depth, laughter and dread, is what makes the existential weight of Elmore so unique. Most comedies distract us from the heaviness of life. Most dramas dwell in it. But Gumball does something stranger. It mixes them, offering both at once. It makes us laugh at the very thing that unsettles us, and in doing so, it teaches us that humor and meaning are not opposites. They are partners in the same strange dance of existence. And so when we watch Gumball and Darwin laugh off their failures, or when we see Nicole rage against the chaos only to collapse into tenderness, or when we hear Richard drift into some odd but oddly profound insight, we sense that the comedy is never empty. It is a shield, a survival mechanism, a way of carrying the unbearable weight of existence without breaking under it. And in that, Elmore mirrors us once again. One of the quiet strengths of Elmore's storytelling is how it refuses to separate comedy from existential dread. In most shows, laughter and fear live in separate corners. But in Gumball's world, they are layered together until you can hardly tell one from the other. A single scene may begin as a gag, swell into absurd terror, then collapse back into silliness, all without breaking rhythm. This fluidity is not random. It reflects the truth of existence itself, where joy and despair so often intermingle. Take, for example, the character Banana Joe. At first glance, he is one of the silliest figures in Elmore. A banana with a loud laugh and a penchant for pranks. Yet episodes like the banana hint at something stranger. When Joe becomes obsessed with comedy to the point where his need for laughter consumes him, it reveals a deeper question. If your entire identity is tied to being funny, what happens when no one laughs anymore? His antics then shift from harmless pranks into desperate cries for validation. The episode stays lighthearted, but underneath is the haunting suggestion that identity built only on performance is fragile, always at risk of collapse. Or consider Mr. Small, the guidance counselor. He drifts through life with a calm, pseudo-spiritual energy, preaching mindfulness and detachment. Yet his episodes often expose a hollowness beneath his words. In The Extras, his yearning to matter leads him into absurd spirals. His calmness feels like a shield against a reality he cannot face, a reminder that sometimes our philosophies are less about wisdom and more about survival. He embodies the way Elmore's residents use masks, comedic or philosophical, to carry the weight of being alive in a world that makes little sense. Even the Wattersons themselves often stumble into stories where comedy bends into dread. Think of The Shell, where Penny's transformation is at first whimsical, then unsettling, then deeply moving. The comedy lies in Gumball's fumbling attempts to handle the situation, but the weight lies in the truth Penny embodies, that selfhood is fluid, and revealing your true form can be both terrifying and liberating. Here, existential dread becomes an engine for growth. The episode asks us to laugh at the awkwardness of identity while still feeling the trembling power of transformation. The show also toys with futility in ways that are both hilarious and devastating. Episodes where Gumball and Darwin chase after something, whether it's a new toy, respect at school, or even just a free item at the store, often end with them losing everything or realizing it never mattered in the first place. The structure is comedic, but it also echoes the Sisyphean struggles described in philosophy. The endless pushing of a boulder uphill, only for it to roll down again. The characters rarely despair, though. Instead, they laugh, dust themselves off, and start on another absurd journey. It is as if Elmore whispers to us that futility is not an ending, but a rhythm of life. The environment of Elmore itself adds to this weight. Its streets, schools, and homes often behave inconsistently, bending and twisting with cartoon logic. A building might collapse one episode, only to be perfectly fine the next. Characters disappear, then reappear without explanation. These inconsistencies are funny at first, but when you sit with them, they carry the subtle implication that reality in Elmore is not stable. For the characters, this instability is normal. For us, watching from outside, it raises unnerving questions. What would it mean to live in a world where nothing is permanent, not even yourself? Episodes that lean into meta-commentary make this tension sharper. In The Disaster, Gumball discovers his life is controlled by an external force, the animator. His attempt to resist ends in chaos, blurring the line between fiction and existence. The comedy lands in the over-the-top destruction, but the weight lingers in the realization. If your choices are written by someone else, are they still yours? And what happens when the story ends? The existential weight of Elmore is not always tragic, though. At times, it is strangely comforting, because even in their most absurd struggles, the characters continue to live, laugh, and love one another. Nicole may carry the weight of holding the family together, but she still finds moments of tenderness. Richard may bumble through life with reckless abandon, but his love for his children is genuine. Even Gumball, in his arrogance and impulsiveness, reveals deep loyalty and empathy. The weight is real, but it is shared. No one in Elmore faces it alone. This sharing of burdens may be the show's greatest lesson. Existential dread, after all, is often born from isolation, from feeling that one alone must bear the meaning of life. But in Elmore, even when the characters face cosmic voids, distorted realities, or the collapse of their own identities, they face them together. The laughter, then, is not a denial of weight, but a way of carrying it collectively. And in that laughter, the unbearable becomes bearable. If there is one truth that Elmore keeps returning to, it is that meaning is not handed down from on high. The characters search for it in strange ways through fame, through control, through rebellion against invisible forces, but none of those quests provide lasting answers. Instead, the show hints at something subtler. Meaning in Elmore is built in the small connections, the fleeting moments, the laughter shared even when everything else is crumbling. Think of Darwin. His very existence is a paradox. He began life as the family pet, a goldfish, who one day sprouted legs and joined the Wattersons as a son and brother. On paper, this is absurd. Yet in practice, it is one of the most sincere relationships in the entire show. Darwin represents the idea that roles, origins, and labels do not define meaning. What matters is the love that grows between people, even if the circumstances make no sense. He never questions whether he should exist. He simply does, and in doing so, he radiates a kind of acceptance the rest of the family often struggles to find. Nicole, on the other hand, embodies the weight of responsibility. She knows the chaos of her household, the instability of Elmore, and the risks of living in such an unpredictable world. She often shoulders that knowledge alone, pressing herself to work harder, fight fiercer, and maintain control. Yet in episodes where her guard slips, we see her craving gentleness. Her story is not just about discipline, but about the need to admit vulnerability. In her struggles, we see reflected the very human tendency to equate worth with control, even though life itself resists being controlled. Richard, the eternal child in a father's body, flips this theme on its head. He is carefree to the point of recklessness, ignoring the weight others carry. But his joy is not shallow. It is a refusal to let dread dominate him. He finds meaning not in achievement, but in play, food, and family. His philosophy may look foolish, but in a world where nothing is stable, his ability to live in the moment is its own form of wisdom. And then, of course, there is Gumball. His character is the most conflicted, constantly bouncing between arrogance and insecurity, brilliance and stupidity. He often confronts the strangest phenomena of Elmore head-on, only to end up frustrated or defeated. Yet he never truly gives up. His resilience lies not in finding the right answers, but in his refusal to stop searching. Gumball is a mirror for all of us, imperfect, stumbling, desperate to be understood, but ultimately determined to keep going, even when the rules of the world refuse to make sense. The existential weight of Elmore becomes most powerful when the show acknowledges that the characters are fictional. Episodes where they break the fourth wall or confront the void itself turn their struggles into metaphors for our own. If fictional beings can wrestle with futility, fear, and meaning, then so too can we. And perhaps the act of watching them, of laughing with them, is itself a way of easing our own burdens. What makes this all so remarkable is that Gumball presents these heavy ideas within the frame of a children's cartoon. It never stops being colorful, fast-paced, and absurd. Yet woven into the humor is an honesty that many adult shows avoid. It acknowledges the randomness of existence, the inevitability of loss, and the instability of identity. But it never leaves us in despair. Instead, it insists that even in the face of nothingness, there is still room for joy, connection, and laughter. In this way, Elmore reflects our own world more closely than we might expect. We too live in a place full of contradictions where technology changes daily, where rules bend or break, where meaning is often elusive. Like the characters, we may feel at times as though we are living in a cartoon logic that refuses to be consistent. And like them, we must learn to carry that weight, not by demanding perfect answers, but by finding the small lights in the chaos. That is perhaps why so many of us return to the Amazing World of Gumball, even years after its ending. Beneath the slapstick, beneath the surreal comedy, we sense that the show is whispering something timeless, that existence is heavy, but laughter can make it lighter, that nothing may be permanent, but love shared in fleeting moments is real, and that even when the world makes no sense, we are never alone in it. So, as the sleepy quiet settles in tonight, remember this lesson from Elmore. The existential weight may never fully disappear, but it does not have to crush us. We can carry it together with humor, with kindness, and with a gentle reminder that even in the strangest, darkest corners of life, there is always space for a smile. And with that, we've reached the end of our quiet journey through the hidden darkness of Elmore. A world that made us laugh, startled us with its shadows, and reminded us that even in absurdity, there is beauty. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, letting your mind drift through these strange stories. Wherever you are, I hope you feel a little lighter, a little calmer, and ready to rest. Sleep well, dream gently, and as always, good night.